Hello, everyone. How are you?
Hi, Mim.
Hi, Nancy. I think we are recording, so we are ready to go. I appreciate everyone being a little patient as I got my computer to do all the things. Welcome. Welcome to you all. My name is Mim Ochsenbein. I am the clinical director here at STAR. Previous to that, I was the director of education here at STAR. I'm an occupational therapist, been one for 26 years, I think. I also am a social worker, but I practice as an OT. I'm originally from Los Angeles, born and raised, and I've been here in Denver about 9 years. And I've been at STAR for 6. So it's a pleasure to have everybody here. And I'm very, very, very excited to meet you guys and to introduce Nancy to you. So before I have Nancy start sharing a little bit about herself, I would love how many people do we have? Oh, we have a lot of people. Not everybody is got their camera on, which is totally fine. If you are so inclined to have your camera on, great. If not, I would love for people to put into chat. Tell us where you are in the world. Tell us, what hat you're wearing while you're here. A lot of us are parents and professionals that work in communities supporting people with sensory processing, and we might be here more as one than the other. Go ahead and put that in. Hi guys, I'm in New Hampshire. Very cool. And if there's something special you'd like us to know about what brought you here, put that in too. I know Nancy and I are very excited to learn about who's here for this. So while you guys are doing that, I'm gonna let Nancy give you guys a little introduction to who she is and her background. And then we'll talk a little bit more about how this is going to go. So Nancy, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Great. So my name's Nancy Nevlin. I'm actually a registered nurse by trade. So I've been an RN for 25 years. I have done a little bit of everything, and that much of that has been in hospice care. So that does play a lot into the sensory world. I wish I would have had the information I have now when I did hospice, but and I have a sensory kid who is fantastic. He is 11 years old, and he got the opportunity to go to STAR in the summer of 2020. And I'm married, and I live right across the river from St. Louis in Illinois. So, and I've lived in this area most of my life. So, yeah, and I'm excited to be here. Mim, your sound is, are you muted?
Thank you. I've had a weird morning, so I appreciate any help in my executive functioning abilities. So
okay.
Feel free to jump in. Anyway, so before we get going on the information around sensory health and why sensory processing is sensory health and what is sensory health for that matter, we love discussion. Nancy and I've had this. We love discussion. So I'm going to be monitoring the chat. If you guys have questions for Nancy or for me or for each other, feel free to put them there. I know for me, and I think Nancy, you and I agreed to this, if anybody who is comfortable with their camera on, comfortable with their mic on, wants to ask their question,
Absolutely. Yeah.
we encourage you to go ahead and interrupt us. Say, I have a question, or excuse me, or whatever it is. Questions, comments, shares, all of the above.
Yeah.
Welcomed, encouraged. We want to hear from you guys. This is quite the brain trust we have going here. I'm looking at all the things, all the different backgrounds, OTs, behavioralists,
SLPs.
Yep, SLPs, early interventionists, like very, very cool. People from all over the country. So we really appreciate you being here. So we asked Nancy here because I'll get to that in a second, because Nancy is, trust me guys, Nancy's super cool. This is going to be really fun. But I think the first thing I want to bring up is this concept of sensory health, like sensory processing is sensory health. Oh, South Africa, right on. How's it? How's it in South Africa? So I think most of us now, the understanding around sensory integration, sensory processing in general culture has really improved quite dramatically since I started practice in the 90s, a whole other millennium, but we'll come back to that some other time, not now. And now we're kind of moving away from this medical deficit model of sensory processing disorder, sensory integrative dysfunction. You guys, a bunch of you might have other labels that you've become accustomed to, because our understanding of sensory processing, brain science, body science, brain body science, has kind of exploded in the 2000s for sure. And what we recognize now is that our sensory processing, or what we're referring to as sensory health, like when these things are working well, when they're supporting us, and what we want to do in the world, directly impacts our physical well-being and our mental well-being, our social and emotional well-being. And Nancy's going to touch on that. And we're going to hear a little bit about Nancy's story. And I think Nancy, as a nurse who has a medical background, is really going to be able to enlighten us on how like this came together for her and her understanding and where she's taken it since, and why. So before we get going on like Nancy's really, really cool journey, I'm wondering, does anybody have thoughts on this whole concept of sensory health? Like what I just kind of laid out on the table, that you're not going to have good physical health, mental health, social, emotional health if you don't have functional, adaptive, robust sensory processing. Does this make sense to everybody? And if it doesn't, feel free to be like, that makes no sense. Truth. Thank you, Daniel. Right? We know this, like our understanding, think about this. There's a lot of people here much younger and cooler than I am, but think about our understanding now. Nancy, you can speak to this as a nurse, and certainly as a nurse that worked in the practice that you worked in. When our body doesn't feel good, our mental health goes down. When our mental health is impacted, our physical health goes down. We know this. We know this from our experience ourselves, people you know. We know this from the ACEs study that was done in the US, et cetera. So Nancy, what are kind of your thoughts on how sensory health is part of this comprehensive understanding of our overall health and well-being?
So my definition of sensory health is just, it's feeling good in your own skin. So feeling good and safe in your body and in your mind. Recognizing even what we enjoy, you know, how I term it, what rings our bell when we perform an activity. How does that make us feel? How does that make our body feel and our brain? I mean, I hate to run. So, you know, that would be a terrible activity for me to do. It doesn't make my body feel good. It stresses me out in my mind. And also understanding that all of that changes throughout our lifespan, I think. So infant health, toddlers, then a child, then adolescence, that there's all of these things that impact all of those things, physical health, mental health, and sensory health as we age. So as a hospice nurse, someone may say, maybe they're unresponsive. So they're not able to tell me. So they're nonverbal. But I'm looking at their body and they're tense, they're fidgeting, they have the facial grimace. So I can imply by nonverbal cues that they're in pain. Kind of figuring that out though is a little bit different. I wouldn't just assume and give them pain medicine. I want to check their physical health first. I want to do a physical assessment. Is their bladder full? Do they have to have a bowel movement? Is their heart racing? Are they having trouble breathing? And all of those things then in turn cause anxiety. Also, then I'm going to look at their environment. Is their room full of people who are talking? Is there a loud TV on, or a loud radio? Is the lighting bright? Is there strained family relationships? All of those things matter and affect that patient's comfort level. So, or if you think about even if anyone's ever had a panic attack or you've been around someone who has had a panic attack, so your heart is racing, you might have nausea, you might have trouble breathing, and you do not feel safe. Your brain does not feel safe. You don't want people touching you. Lights seem brighter, sounds seem louder. And that can escalate rather quickly. So going back to sensory health, I mean, for me, what I try to tell people is what rings your bell, what makes your body feel good, what makes your brain feel calm and safe. And those are the things that we want to focus on so that we can have a good quality of life, feel joy, have good relationships, and all of that stuff just kind of ties together.
Oh, that was really well said. Thank you. Oh, Cindy, Cindy really liked that.
Good.
Again, I really appreciate, Nancy, your perspective, because you were coming at it as this medically trained nurse, provider, as well as someone who is experienced as a parent watching the impacts as well.
Right.
Now you kind of have this integrated, comprehensive view. And before we jump into more of Nancy's story, I'm wondering if anyone here is willing to share, how are you conceptualizing this idea of sensory health? Is this a brand new idea for you? This term, sensory health versus sensory processing issues. Good, Cindy, I'm glad that worked for you. Anyone willing to share any thoughts there? From your own experiences, maybe? Has anyone had an experience where you can point to, aha, my sensory processing was impacted this way? Or maybe a close family member, a friend. Yes, Rebecca.
Yeah, it's very loud here. Is it too loud? There's major construction equipment. Is it too loud right now? Okay. Well, I think the really fascinating thing about this is you can have sensory problems from birth and not know that you have sensory problems because that's normal.
Right. Yeah, that's your world. This is how you work.
Right. And then as you address those sensory problems and you begin to introduce health, you address your physiology, you address the different components that your body specifically needs, then you begin to see that you had problems in the first place. Mm-hmm. And it's this unlayering process of figuring out what is the next problem that I need to address. Like if I don't just hear sound, I feel sound and I see sound, then how do we reduce the overwhelm, because we have this overwhelming experience of having multiple reactions to sound. So I have seen an incredible revolutionary process in myself as I've addressed my physiology. And I think it's fascinating, and I'm so grateful.
I have a similar experience to that, Rebecca. Cindy, I see your hand is up. What are your thoughts on this?
Hi, good morning. Thanks very much, Nancy, for your presentation. And Mim, it's always good to see you and learn with you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thanks, Rebecca, for what you said. We had a little girl last week who was impacted, constipated, and she had a family history. Mom said 4 generations, and they worked with their pediatrician. I'm telling you, a week later, they had addressed this, taken care of it. She was a different human being, 9 months old, moving, happy, capable. It was unbelievable. It was really unbelievable. And I think what you're talking about in terms of just the broader sense of moving from this siloed model
Right.
of brokenness to completeness. It makes me, first of all, appreciate what a wealthy society we live in, that we have I don't know what the word, sorry, all of those different pieces that we can take the time to say, what's the broader effect of my world and how am I interacting with my world, so that I can feel safe in my body and not judge myself and not judge others also. I loved that you said that you hate running. I hate running, but I love hiking.
Me too.
Love hiking.
Yeah.
Love hiking. But that's the language that we give to our families of, I want to empower you. I don't need you to be a performance monkey for me in a session. I need you to feel empowered in your body.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Thank you for that, Cindy. It's lovely to see you too. And then Sally, I see your hand has been raised for a while.
Yeah, I'm so interested in the idea of, so I'm a 40-year-old woman who was diagnosed with autism and then my sensory processing all in my 40s. And it's been such an interesting process for me because my senses kind of exploded. Like my whole first 40 years, it was, yeah, this is just normal for me. Yeah, I'm a little sensitive to sound. My vision's a little off, whatever. But then after my diagnosis, it gave words and meaning to all of those senses.
Right.
And they got even louder. All of a sudden, everything was worse, actually, which that was a super interesting thing. But when you talk about sensory health, for me, like I went hiking last Friday, and up and deep into the mountains, I'm like, wow, I'm whole right now. Like my vision's right, my hearing's right, my proprioceptive's right, everything's right. And it just felt so good.
Oh, I love that. I love how you just described that, Sally, that I was right. My whole being was right in the world. Ruth, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm 81 years old, and for probably at least 50 years of my life, my question is, what in the wide world is wrong with me? Because I was a high performer in school, and everyone said you'll have a great life, and I could hardly manage. I was in total overwhelm. So Elaine Aron's book.
Yes, highly
introduced
sensitive
me,
people,
yeah,
personalities. Yeah.
and it took me probably another 25 years to accept that that is who I am. And so, and my whole family is completely riddled with sensitivities. I'm living with 2 grandchildren who are over the top sensitive. So
Yeah.
I have just come out of the closet at my Unitarian church. A woman wrote an article about me and sensitivity and spirituality. So my journey right now is mostly making sure the environment is safe for me even to explain sensitivity, because I've had people say, this is really fascinating, Ruth. I'm so glad that you're telling us this now, but that's not always the case.
Right.
So
Yeah.
There's the issue of, where are you safe enough? It's just like LGBT and Black and all of that. We're 20% of the population, and nobody even knows that we're disadvantaged within the culture. Nobody wants us to tell it's too loud. Could you fix it? No, we can't. No, on and on and on. So
Yeah.
for me, it's the wiggle room between my, I've got this wall, I can't move it. And what can I do emotionally to practice that this is a wall and accept it? And it's fine. I mean, I love being outdoors. I love all the places that, but sometimes you just have to go in the war zone. And after you're done with the war zone, I have to give myself lots of recovery time. That's always the answer is, Ruth, get the hell out of this for recovery time. And it means a lot of time alone.
And Ruth, I really appreciate, first of all, thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that in this space with us, and letting us honor that. So thank you for that. I also, some of the things you said, I'm thinking about you, Nancy, and Ruth, you spoke about safety. And you were talking about your safety in your own body. And I think when I want to address one thing that Daniel brought up, but no, sorry, it was Carly brought up. Yeah, Kayla brought up. But I want to hold on to this thought about safety, because I think what Nancy is going to share with us and talk about is, you know, at STAR, and Nancy can speak to this, we work a lot on helping individuals feel safe in their own bodies. What we cannot do is stay with you and go out into the world and in every context, environment, and interaction, make changes for you in the moment. And that is something that Nancy's actually very specifically taken on, because to Ruth's point, Ruth has learned how to take care of herself to the best of her ability, and seems to be doing a remarkable job. So well done, Ruth. And there's a lot more work to be done. To Ruth's point, it can't, like, the onus can't always be on the individual. This is just the way we are. Right. And so we need to start making cultural shifts and changes. And that's kind of, before I hand this over to Nancy to talk about that, Kayla, you said you had heard this concept of sensory health be described as sensory preferences. I'm going to suggest that that's some old language, because we all, every single person that's here, all 53 of us have sensory preferences. That is part of being a human, being an organism, actually on the planet. You have preferences. Your favorite color is a sensory preference. So is your favorite food. That's a sensory preference. Sensories, various channels there. The clothes you like to wear. How fast you drive your car. These are all sensory preferences. I think for those individuals, those of us maybe here, those we serve, those we might know, love, and take care of, preferences doesn't seem to cut it. This is like sensory requirements, sensory needs, things that I have to avoid, things that I have to have in order to function, much less be well. As I think is what Ruth pointed out, like, you got to go in the war zone sometimes, and then I got to take care of myself. And that means everybody's got to go away for hours, maybe sometimes even days. Things that support us in doing our day-to-day. So preferences, I'd argue all of us have, just like all of us have sensory processing. For those of us with disordered sensory processing, where it's impacting health, wellness, functionality, it becomes, the stakes are a lot higher, in my opinion. Nancy, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, and that's difficult. That's kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Let's talk about what you're doing. I have like amped it up.
Okay.
I think everybody needs to know.
So we did, my son and I and my husband were fortunate enough to travel to STAR summer of 2020. The things that we saw prior to reaching out to STAR were a lot of anxiety, a lot of aggression, a lot of negative thinking and negativity, what appeared to be rudeness sometimes. And then the obvious things of covering the ears and things like that, and bright lights being bothersome, and then seeking out other things. So we got to go to STAR the summer of 2020. And that I found STAR by reading books, and that was a great story in itself. I won't go into that, but I had that mindset that I'm gonna, I mean, none of us are perfect and we're all growing. And at the time that we went to STAR, I was a skeptic. I wasn't a skeptic about my son having disordered processing. I knew that. But I was a skeptic on how playing in the gym with Katie was going to help. So we were there a total of 4 weeks. We went out for 1 week, came back, and then went back out for 3 weeks. So Sam and I were living basically out of our suitcases in Colorado. It was a stressful time, but we felt blessed to be able to be there. But if anybody's familiar with Star and Mim, you know, the cloud swing in the gym, and Sam he couldn't get enough of the bouncing on that cloud swing, and Katie and I would just wear ourselves out. And I actually got agitated with Sam for becoming, and you can laugh at this, Mim, because I have to joke about it, for becoming rude in the sensory gym with Katie. And I know that sounds so silly to me now, because I'm like, well, Nancy, that's the point. He was dysregulated, you know, but I thought culturally, you know, that matters. Culturally, I'm thinking, where it's the Star Institute and you need to be polite, you know, like that's just where I was, you know, and it happens. So then it kind of dawned on me, okay, Nancy, that's kind of why we're here, you know, and that is the way he was displaying his dysregulation, was to become what appeared to be rude, and that was okay. So we got home from Star, and I started looking at my environment, myself, my husband, my parents, my siblings, my dog, and I thought, wait a minute, we all have disordered processing. I was still on this disordered, you know, I thought, well, look at how he, you know, brushes his hair, and then the dog, he doesn't have any body awareness, and he's all over the place. And you know, I start looking at everything through the sensory lens. My patients at work, you know, the man who didn't feel pain, and I thought, before I had gone to Star, I thought, you're just trying to be tough guy, or trying to be a hero, you know. And no, he really has never felt pain, you know? And so I just started looking at all of this through this lens, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to talk to Katie. I mean, I'm going to have a bus load of people to take back out to her. She's going to be busy with all of us. And then something just clicked. It was like, wait a minute. No, this is, you know, this is just our individual processing. This isn't disordered, you know. This is just how each of our brains is processing in our bodies. And so then I just wanted to tell everybody, like, so I did. We have a great support system, family and friends. So of course I was kind of educating them as I was learning. Sam's friends' parents. So then they started asking, and I always referred them to Star's website, because there's great information there, so much research, and, you know, so I would refer them to there. And then I had to educate anybody really who was going to be like provider wise. So pediatricians, dentists, orthodontists, ENTs, you know, so I started sending them to Star's website, and it just became this, this kind of, I just saw everything through a sensory lens from that point. And realizing that what I was seeing wasn't necessarily disordered, some of it was. And then, you know, for instance, when Sam would go to, he has an ear problem, when he would go to his ENT, and not the current one that we see, but the one that we saw before, Sam would have a lot of anxiety when he went, and kind of, you know, this doctor would shame him, you know, and before I didn't realize that he was, but then when I got back from Star, I'm like, okay, you're shaming him for his sensory profile, and that's not okay, you know. And so we fired him and moved on. But it does happen, you know, if you're not able to sit and be still and, you know, not cry and not make too much noise, you know, then we're going to shame you and, say, boy, you really need to do something about that anxiety, we'll get right on that. Yeah. So yeah, and you kind of have to advocate like that. But I had, and Sam's counselor, he's seen a counselor since before we went to STAR. She's been fantastic. She got to Zoom with Katie and she learned a whole bunch. And she said, this is going to help me with my other kids, that didn't necessarily fit into that autism place, because that's another thing. People think that when they hear sensory processing disorder, they think of autism. Well, then you must have autism, and that may be true, but it may not be either. And getting people to understand that, because they have been told over and over that if you have sensory sensitivities or disorder, that you are autistic. That's not necessarily true, maybe, but what difference does it make? It's the way that we are wired and that we're processing our environment. So it's okay. That's a good question from Cindy.
Yeah, we're going to get to that very, very short. Cindy, you're going to be very happy with the rest of what Nancy shares. And I just kind of want to point out some of the things, Nancy, that you talked about to pull this all together. You have this beautiful child, Sam, who it sounds like does not have an autism diagnosis.
Correct. Correct.
So for those, just to clarify what Nancy's saying, right? So actually, sensory integration dysfunction, first identified in the 60s and 70s by Dr. Jean Ayres, was first identified in children with learning differences, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, right? Autism wasn't in the mix really then. It has since become synonymous, but so has a lot of other ADHD. 40% of individuals with ADHD also have disordered sensory processing. Gifted population, 33%. The more gifted you are, the more likely you're going to have sensory processing issues, and potentially sensitivities, but dyspraxia, postural issues, discrimination issues, the gamut. We've got mental health disorders, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anxiety disorders, hand in hand with sensory processing. Depression, there's some. And then certainly we know with somebody shared really lovely share with us about a parent who had Alzheimer's and watching their sensory systems. My father has Parkinson's, and it is really clear that his proprioceptive system just isn't there for him anymore. And so just kind of like acknowledging that sensory health is this dimension of so many other conditions that we are aware of.
And trauma.
Yeah, and trauma.
That's a whole webinar.
I'm going to let you get to that one too, because I think that it plays into it. So, when Nancy was talking about her child's anxiety, well, you're going to have anxiety. I think that's a nice natural protective response when the world is against you. Yep. Physical world, the relational world is against you. You talked about, so anxiety, we know that has physical detriments when it's chronic. You talked about shaming. That is a mental health.
Yeah.
Right. We know what happens when we shame, especially children.
Absolutely.
What happens to mental health. And then and you talked about like the politeness factor. No, we don't expect children to be polite. We don't, that's just not on our like, really, that's just not the priority right now. But thank you for wanting to make our sense. But your relationship with your child in that moment became stressed because you were not performing the way culturally or the society expects, which I take as a reflection on me as a parent. And I'm with you. I had this with my oldest. I can still see it. I can still remember the exact moment of like feeling this way, because this is a reflection on me as a parent.
Right.
And so now relationship is strained,
Mhm.
right? So these are all the pieces we talked about: mental health, social, emotional well-being, physical health and well-being,
Mhm.
right? Things we don't expose ourselves to that could be beneficial for us because of the other negative components of it. So thank you, Nancy, for sharing that part of your story. So I'm wondering now if you can take it to the next level and what you did and what you talked about. You started to look around your immediate sphere and you were like, but then I think you actually looked another level or two past that.
I did.
Tell us about that.
So I started educating the providers that were directly related to Sam. And then I was just like, everybody needs to, I really did feel like everybody needs to know this. Oh my gosh, I need to help them understand. So I was willing to educate anyone, but law enforcement came to my mind just because of how Sam presented initially. I thought, if he was an adult and he was pushing people and hitting and being rude and having no control over his body, and he was an adult, what would that look like and what would that result in? And being a nurse, I have worked with law enforcement. Because I was out in the field a lot with hospice and home health. I would have interaction with them. And law enforcement has a difficult, they're kind of right in the middle of this mental health crisis that we are in, because people call the police and then they respond. And they may or may not have the appropriate training to deal with the problems that they're being asked to deal with. So they came to mind. And to be honest, my local law enforcement, they were extremely willing to listen to me. So out of all of anyone that I contacted, they were the ones that said, sure, we'll listen to you. Now I did have to, I went through the Illinois, and every state has a process for this. So I'm not sure let me see here. So I had to go through the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board. I had to create a class and submit it to them, and they had to review it. And so the law enforcement officers actually ended up getting credit, because in Illinois, you have to have so many hours of mental health training that falls under that mental health category. So mine was procedural justice, human rights, and crisis intervention. So, and I have to shout out, I was put in contact with a lady in my community who was in charge of that education for law enforcement. Her name is Penny Abbott. She is with the West Central Illinois Criminal Justice Council, and she walked me through how to get the class certified so that the officers could get credit, their mental health credit. So in professional, if you're an OT or a PT or a nurse, you get CE, you have to have so many CEUs, same with law enforcement. So I did that, and I ended up educating all of my county officers. And we had a detective, and I actually got sensory kits donated through my husband's business to all of the police officers. So they were able, all of them are equipped with a sensory kit in their car. And they know how to use it and why. And so I created this class and educated all of them. So then I was asked from in Illinois, we have crisis. I think it's nationwide in the US. They call it CIT, crisis intervention teams. And they're kind of like the mental health, police. They're specially trained. And I was asked to go to the CIT conference in Peoria, Illinois, and do a breakout session there with the officers being trained in CIT. So that was fun, and that just happened. but I just kind of have been open to that. The law enforcement avenue, really, I had a lot of people willing to help me and help me succeed in that. And they were so willing to listen that that's kind of been my focus, since I've done this. And they get their credit, they get their mental health hours, and they learn a lot. So I've gotten really great feedback from people in the class saying, we've had a lot of mental health people come in and talk to us. Some of the stuff they've been asked to learn, like pharmacology, things like that's not going to help them. And, back up a little bit though, part of my class though, because I know there's somebody very interested in that, is I want to say the bulk of my class is getting the officers to recognize their own sensory health and what that means for them. So I start with a sensory self-assessment. So looking at a list of things and saying, oh, I didn't even know that mattered, oh, I do that, I didn't know why, So because we know that if we can't, I know for myself, until I recognized my own sensory profile, how I was feeling in my body, and acknowledging those things, I couldn't help my son. I found it very difficult to try to understand that until I started. And Mim, you told me what that was called, and I think I remember. Was it embodied when you recognize? Okay, see, you taught me something. Yeah. And I try not to use a lot of clinical language in my class or when I'm talking to people, just because I think if I do start throwing a lot of terminology, they just are like, okay, I'm done, but if I say what rings your bell, they're kind of like, oh, that I can understand that. But so yeah, if you back to that trauma piece, I mean, if you think of law enforcement, I know myself as a nurse. I mean, as a nurse for 25 years, I've worked out in the field in the emergency rooms, and I thought, I've never experienced any trauma. Nope, I'm good, and then you start thinking back and you're like, wait a minute, I have. And that's kind of what I've found with the officers that I've interacted with and had in class. Was, oh no, it's fine, that's what we're, there's your societal norm is, nope, that's part of my job and I'm good, and that's what everyone expects. And but it's okay to say, you know what, no, that really did affect me this one time a year ago, this day. I know it didn't seem like a big deal, but it really was to me. And that's okay to discuss. And some of them were more open than others. Again, that I found was a generational thing. So the older, more, that had been in law enforcement a very long time, they're like, nope, I'm fine. I've handled everything well. So, but then some of the younger ones were like, no, and they had great questions. Once they learned about interoception, they had great questions of, oh yeah, I did notice this after this stressful time. And that explains it, So I think that if you can teach people how to recognize their own sensory health and their sensory, I hate to say preferences, but their profile, then they start, that kind of piques curiosity, and they start paying attention to environments and other people and behavior and thinking, wonder what's happening there, instead of just assuming, oh, this person, is being rude and they'll teach them, they can look and say, oh, this might be going on. So, yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask the group too, but to give some well, faces without giving faces to Nancy's. I think the foresight you had around this is remarkable.
Thank you.
And just to let you guys know that this is real, I've got two quick stories for you. One's more recent. We'll start with that. It's client here at Star. Young man is 18. He is non-speaking. He does happen to also be an autistic, who's receiving services through us. And he was out in the community. This was a month, maybe 6 weeks ago. Out in the community, became dysregulated. And he got big. His physical expression of that got big. And someone called the police. I'm not sure who in the community did, if it was his family because they were concerned about safety, or somebody else called. The police came and started to talk to him the way police can do. And he didn't respond verbally. And then an officer put his hands on this young man. And the young man responded at that moment with all he had, which was a physical reaction. He doesn't have spoken word. He didn't have access to being able to communicate, and he was dysregulated. So he got physical back. And then the next thing you know, this kid is on the ground, pushed down onto the ground with his arms behind him, and he was arrested for being physical with an officer. His therapist here was devastated. The parents of this young man were devastated. It was traumatic for him, weeks before he could come back to therapy.
Yeah.
He had to go to court. Just traumatic. And I know you're going to actually talk about that too in a bit, Nancy. So that's one example. Second one is personal. I think it was last summer. My oldest, like I said, has been identified as neurodivergent. And part of my son's presentation is when he gets stressed, he goes pretty flat on you. And he got pulled over by an officer in our community. And which in of itself made my son, like his arousal went way up. He became dysregulated. So he kind of shut down, is essentially what he does. He shuts down. And so the officer was talking to him, and my son wasn't providing the eye contact. He wasn't providing the answers in a tone. It was a flat tone. So the officer accused him of being disrespectful, and which was making everything worse. So now my kid can't even string words together. And we ended up, so he was 18. We ended up with a phone call from that officer demanding to speak. This gets into a whole other thing, to my son's father. Wouldn't talk to me, but that's like a whole other thing. Oh yeah, no, we don't have to go into that whole thing about, raising your son properly and all the things. And let's just say the officer ended up coming to our house so we could have a little conversation around lots of things, but around neurodivergencies and how this could look like something else, and not to presume so fast, right? So when I learned about the work Nancy was doing, like my heart went out to her, like, thank you, because I don't have the time to talk to each individual officer as my kid gets in trouble.
Right.
I don't have that kind of time.
Well, and I think, what I hear as well, if we know, that's what I've heard, if we know that we're dealing with an autistic individual, and I get that, the more, no matter what we do, the more information we have, the better we're able to perform and do things, better decisions we make. But again, does it matter? Because like my son doesn't have an autism diagnosis. And honestly, I would, if someone said, like, let me get my PowerPoint out to explain dyspraxia, because no one knows what that is. And, then his postural, issues and anxiety and sensory processing disorder. Like, we don't all wear a thing that says, I don't like being touched, or I'm nonverbal, that it's just, everyone is wired differently. And that these are the things that we can look for to know, oh, maybe this person is not verbal. Wait a minute, I have these cards that Nancy Nevlin gave me that I can communicate with this person, or I could give them my phone and have them type for me, what's going on. It's just, we start having more compassion. I told them, I told my classes I assume now, I go into the world and I assume that everyone is neurodivergent. I just assume that. It's safer. I'm nicer. I mean, if I'm in Walmart and I'm getting irritated because my sensory systems are overwhelmed by all the people and noise and lights, I am a kinder person when I run into the rude person, who won't move their cart out of the aisle or whatever, all the things that life happens and irritates us. I'm a kinder person. I communicate more compassionately. And what I also heard from the officers that were in my class was, will you please share this with the community so that other people know? Us knowing it is great, but when people call the police, for something, maybe that's not the best choice. Maybe they don't need to be calling the police. Maybe they, maybe need to ask them, are you okay? And how to communicate with people. So I heard that loud and clear as well, is that we're really happy to have this information, but could you tell everyone else, So and we have to, I try to look at it from all sides. I really, really do, because I know that I was that person that didn't know that it was okay for Sam to be rude in the gym, and Katie showed me compassion, as Katie was Sam's OT. She didn't judge me and say, you're a horrible mom and what are you talking about? Now she set me straight, but she did it in a compassionate way. And had she not been so compassionate in her communication and the way she communicated that with me, maybe I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. Maybe I would have taken offense to that and been like, well, we like to be nice to people, we like our kids to be nice to people, but she wasn't judgy about it in the way that she was like, that's kind of the point here. And so she explained and she educated me. And I think that's what I try to do, instead of being like, what you're doing is wrong. And though much of it is, we've all been there in some capacity. So I try to look at it from all sides, and most of it boils down to not being educated on things and neurodivergency. So hopefully this will help, and other people can do this. I am not a speaker. I am not I tell people in my class, this is not what I do. So bear with me. I'm a nurse and I'm a mom, and I care about people. And I just want people to know this for themselves, to improve their own quality of life, but also to help the people that they serve and their family members and then their friends, and just to make that shift, and I am a happier person, because of what I've learned and what I continue to learn. Don't ever stop learning, and that's what I tell people is I read and watch, and, I'm always learning and changing my mind about things and asking questions. And I think that's just kind of where I try to steer people.
That's awesome, Nancy. And, based on the questions that are being asked, like, I am wondering, so I have two questions, and I'm going to forget them if I don't list both, and you can choose
Sure.
any you want to do. First, I would love for you to talk about other areas, other communities, professions that you've noticed could really benefit from the sharing of information, get people to start thinking about where can they have some impact. I know Ruth shared, like she shares stuff at her church, like that's brilliant. And then if you could kind of give people a sense, you started to talk about what you start with and how you bring attention to an individual's own sensory profile, preferences, avoidances, needs. Can you kind of walk us through, like, what is your training, just the outline of, like, this is kind of my flow, my process, and why? I know we had a really great conversation about how that's evolved for you, why you've done what you've done. So which of those two you want to start with?
So let's talk about other professionals. So my number one group of professionals that I wanted to address was educators and anybody who works in a school, because school was a really troublesome area for us. And it didn't start out that way, but it ended that way. And I say ended because I do homeschool now. So I get a lot of referrals and calls from parents trying to navigate the educational system. And I tell them I feel so terrible because I abandoned it, and I love teachers. I love educators. My brother's a teacher. But it's there again, that lack of knowledge and not knowing. They haven't been as excited to talk to me as like law enforcement was, because they feel like they know. I think they have OTs in the school and they feel like they're covered, but I wonder how much of that information, like Mim said earlier, I just feel like screaming, you don't understand, like the research has exploded and we have to learn it. We have to know this to help people. Reading a book from the 1970s is not going to help my son, not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm sure there's knowledge to be gained, but the recent research and the latest matters. And not only, our teacher declined a Zoom with Star, and that was my determinant for homeschooling, because I felt like I needed someone who was wanted to learn, and wanted not just to learn information as a whole, but how they can help the specific student. Because it mattered. And so they declined that. And that was my, that was my determiner. But like I said, I have met so many good teachers. I have a Facebook group. I didn't talk about that. I did start that right away as well, that educates people. And I have a lot of teachers in that Facebook group who are very interested and are very curious and are going to STAR's website and reading and learning how to help students and, how to help all students, not just ones with IEPs and 504s. All of them have sensory systems. And, it's not just about that one student with disordered processing and a diagnosis. It's about all of them. So that is a big one. And then mental health professionals, and they have been very, very receptive. The ones that I have, the counselors I have reached out to, we have met for coffee and we have talked, and they are on it, that our local mental health people want me to train the staff, first. And then offer it to clients, as a general class. So they've been very receptive. And Sam has a wonderful counselor, and she was happy to Zoom with Katie and learn more. And she's a part of my group. She reads, and it is not just for Sam. It is for all of her kids, all of her clients, adults too, teenagers. The elderly, it helps all of her clients. So they have been fantastic. Any first responder, healthcare professional, firefighters, anybody who goes into situations that are stressful, because I tell people, I don't care who you are, and if you are the epitome, your sensory profile is like textbook perfect. It's just, and your mental health is perfect, and you get in a stressful situation and you get in fight or flight, it's hard telling how you're going to act. So, firefighters and police officers are responding to these things all the time, and people are terrified, so anyone who is, and I think everybody could benefit from it, but those are my top ones that I feel like.
And I think it's so interesting because when you and I spoke, you actually I agree with all of those people and have stars worked to create content to share with these groups as well. And then you also identified, having had worked with law enforcement, any first responder group I think is phenomenal, but you kind of saw like what happens after the fact, right? So like what I described, that young man who got arrested and now has to show up before a judge. You want to share your thoughts on that?
So I got at the CIT conference, I was just, I hate to say I was in heaven. I love to people watch and I love to learn. So I was just soaking it all in and talking to different people, and I loved the speakers. But what I learned, so most of the people there are CIT trained. So they are specially trained mental health police officers. So what I was hearing was that they would have, say, someone, I'm just going to use an example. They might have somebody, say, with schizophrenia, who got police called a lot, and they knew this person very well, and they wanted to get them help, the appropriate help. But they would go to a judge and say, okay, how can we help this person? Don't want to arrest them. Jail's not the place for them. They really need a mental health person. How can you help? And the judge would say, bring me a criminal charge and we can talk more. And the judge would say, I get elected, based on the criminal charges that I prosecute and that I do. And the police officers were very frustrated because they were like, I don't want to arrest this person. This is not what they need. I don't want to escalate and traumatize this person when it's obvious that they need a different type of help. So that I had never thought about that a judge or state's attorney would need to know this, or that would need to be included on that conversation. And yesterday I had the opportunity to talk to an appellate court judge who used to be a mental health court judge. And so I asked her, what does that take? How do you get a mental health judge? How do you have mental health court in your community? And I did find out that process. So your county judge has to request that and make the recommendation and say, and then there are different requirements for that. And then it's actually approved by the Illinois Supreme Court. So that was interesting, that process of how that happens. So there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of people who need the education and need the information. So what's next, Mim?
Two things. I think they are related. What is happening in my computer right now? They are related. The first one is, how do you get in to speak to these groups, and then the flow of your training?
Okay, gotcha. You call them. I reached out. I really lucked out with my law enforcement stuff because I was sharing my idea with my boss, and she's like, wait a minute, you need to talk to Penny Abbott, who's my sister-in-law, and she can help you. And so Penny she's in charge of the law enforcement education. So every county should have that, every area should have that. So I contacted her, and I tell you, like, everyone I come in contact with, they have experience with this. She had a neurodivergent son. She's like, this is amazing. This needs to happen. And so she really helped me get that. But so I called her, and she helped me get the approval and the classes set up. As far as like the mental health people, I just reached out to them and said, hey, this is what I do. I have a Facebook group I'd be happy to add you to, and I'd love to meet for coffee, you know? And I just talked to them, and which is kind of hard when you're an introvert. So as I kind of am, I'm, I guess, an outgoing introvert. But I reach out to them basically and just offer it. And you get better at it, you know, after you do it a couple of times. And with professionals, they're going to want to get credit. So, you know, whatever you have to do to get them CEUs, that approval process. Because when they hear that, they're like, well, sure, you know, we all need those, you know. So, and community classes, that's pretty simple. You would want to kind of tailor your presentation for more parent and, you know, not as much clinical info. But I mean, you could contact your local health department and ask them, you know, could I do this? I know I work for the health department in my county, and, you know, my administrators offered me the building to teach classes in, and people really do want to help you. If they know this means a lot to you and you're, you know, doing they want to help. I think more people want to help than that. And the flow of my presentation, you know, for law enforcement, I start with the sensory self-assessment, because then that's easy for them to look at a list and say, oh, I didn't know this is what this is about. Because most of them don't even know what it's about whenever they hear the title. And they're thinking, well, I'll get my credit, you know. But when they say, oh, liking crunchy foods and liking to drink milkshakes out of straws and all of those things, rocking in my chair, they start realizing, oh, this is what this is about. And they start recognizing it in them. And then I go through and I try to keep everything very, very simple. So I don't use a lot of clinical language or graphics. I use very simple language and explain all 8 sensory systems. And I try to use pictures of my son. So I think that makes it more personable. They say, oh my, you know, look at this cute little boy, you know. And I'm like, yeah, that little boy used to get aggressive, you know. And so but it makes people pay attention more. It really does. And they know that it's close to your heart, you know, and I think they listen more attentively. But I run through that, and then I was able to contact, there is a guy I think he's in Florida, Dennis DeBalt, who did a lot of training, law enforcement training on autism. It was specific to autism. And I reached out to him when I had this idea, and I told him, this is my idea. And he told me it was too complicated of an idea to pull off. And I said, well, we'll see. And he meant well by that, but he said, that sounds awfully, you know. But he did a lot of educating, I think, earlier on, when most people did correlate sensory processing difficulties to autism. He also happens to have an autistic son, and that was his why. he created these films specific to law enforcement. So it shows it, well, they're actors, but they act out specific real life scenarios that police officers might encounter, and how they can act and how they can help the person. And I tell people the only problem that they are such good films, but they are very dated. And even the language that they use is dated. So at the CIT conference, their idea was for me to create a new film. So they said, could you tell Star that, that to maybe help you make a new film? I said, oh, they'll get right on that. But yeah, that would be fantastic. But I knew you'd like that. I knew you'd like that. So I do that. And then I'm able to show them films of, and then I can stop the film and say, okay, that is tactile defensiveness. That person doesn't want to be touched, or the way that that officer spoke to that person is not going to be productive really for anyone. And so, because he does give examples that this is bad communication, this is good type stuff. It's very specific. So that's worked out well because they're able to relate to that. They're like, oh yeah, you know, that happens to us all the time. So there is that. And then I open it up for discussion. I do just touch on trauma with them and how that has affected their sensory health, whether they want to admit it or not. And we chat and dialogue basically. And I've had lots of great questions in that format. And so that's kind of, I make it very personal, so that I can speak from my own personal experience. I'm just not standing there, you know, with a textbook. And when I don't know something, because that's another thing that makes this tricky. People as a whole really like, if this happens, then I do this. And if this person has this diagnosis, that's why we like diagnosis, you know, because we can say, oh, you know, then this is what I do. It doesn't work that way with anything, with any of the mental health diagnosis or sensory profiles. There are so many different variations of sensory profile. There's no way that I can tell you, okay, if this person pushes you, this is what, you know, I can give a really good example of how to co-regulate with that person and kind of decrease the sensory environment. And but I can't tell you word for word what to say, and I cannot, it doesn't work that way. And that is one thing that is difficult to explain to people, especially who are not used to talking about this. Is that, you know, I don't know what I would do in that situation. It would depend on a lot of things, you know. So there's just no formula or cookie cutter way here with really anything. I mean, we like to say that in the medical world, well, you're on the congestive heart failure track, or you're on, we're not all the same. And this isn't always going to work. And maybe this might, and this might not. Same thing here, you know, it's just compassionate communication and being very aware of the sensory environment is what I tell people, you know, so.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Nancy. And I really appreciate you sharing your process with us, how you got there, some of the obstacles you've come across, and then how you've worked through those to provide like some pretty amazing resources for your community. I'm just looking at all the great comments that people are putting in. Yeah, I mean, essentially, you know, it happens in layers, everyone. First, we just have to bring awareness to that this is a thing, that this is how it could look in different situations. This is how it could impact your world and the individual's world, and what you do matters. And I love Daniel shared like slow and low, remember to act, don't react.
Yeah.
There's lots of stuff out there. I know when Nancy first got started and she said, do you have anything I can use? I was like, what do you want?
Yeah.
Like, how long are you talking for? I can give you more than you really want, or if you do what you
Well,
think
and I totally was so grateful because Star helped me. I mean, I contacted them right away and said, this is my idea. What can you give me to use? And Mim's like, well, tell them about sensory modulation disorder. And I thought, yeah, because that really does fit with the law enforcement. And then I was telling my brother, who is a teacher, and he goes, what?
what?
And he goes, no, Nancy, they're not gonna, don't use that language with them. You can explain that in different words. And I'm like, oh, so I had a lot of input, like explaining that in a way that people will understand, a lay person.
Yeah.
So
sure.
no knowledge. So
I think that's great. I love this. Compassionate communication and being aware of sensory environment. Yes, great foundation to build from. That's from Meg. And I'm wondering if it's okay with you, Nancy, I'd love to bring up the short slide deck you gave us that has a lot of your resources and let you kind of talk about each resources.
Sure.
Was that okay with everybody? I know there's been a lot of questions about resources. So I am just going to share my screen really quick.
I have my sensory self-assessment pulled up on my desktop.
Oh, let's do that first. I'm going to stop. Can you, hopefully you can share your screen.
Yep.
Let me know if that's not working for you.
Okay. You see it?
Yep.
So this is, I adapted this from a sensory self-assessment that was really good from Therapy Works. But the directions were, it was basically, does it increase arousal? Does it calm you down? And I wanted something a little bit just more basic and just getting people to think a little bit about, oh, I don't know, does that, so this is kind of what I came up with and I added to it. So I just go through the sensory systems and just get people to be curious about, oh, I do tap my toes or foot or, I can't stop moving. So tactile. And some people don't even realize, oh, I do like a cluttered desk. I didn't realize that was, or I don't like a clutter, I don't like my workspace to be like that.
There's another great adult one for the OTs out there. There's an adult sensory preference checklist through the alert program. That you can use for education. What's cool about theirs is they list things and then people put arrows like that wakes me up, relaxes me, and sometimes it's both. And so it same kind of idea that they do exist out there in the world.
Yeah. And when I get to smells, I always remind people that's a really big one for trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, other things are too, but in my experience, clinically, smells are very powerful. And then the proprioception.
Smells and touch if someone has a trauma.
Yes.
Yeah, smells, touch, and then sound.
And then interoception.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of the officers when I don't know, because we got that a lot from Sam. Do you have to go to the bathroom? I don't know, So that they've had that, they've experienced people doing that and they're thinking, well, how do you not know, So now they know why people are like, I don't know. And I focus a lot on interoception with them just because I feel like that's the one that they're not going to hear as much about. that's the least talked about in mainstream, I guess. You know, Star talks about it a lot, and it is getting more, you know, more attention through different outlets, but I focus a lot on that. I also feel like it's very relevant to them with probably their trauma history and things.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's what that is.
That's great, Nancy. Thank you. And then I'm going to put up your slide with your contact. And then a lot of people were wondering if you could also, I don't think it's on here from what I can tell, but your, sorry, slideshow, your Facebook group. A lot
Oh
of
yeah.
people are interested in that. So I don't see that on here, but maybe we could put that in the chat.
Yep.
What can people search?
It is, if I can figure out how to put it in the chat, but it's Sensory Strong. Not with a 2, Sensory Strong with an exclamation point, and it is a private group, which I go back and forth on, but I wanted it to really be a safe place for people to share things without it being public and for everyone to be able to see. So I think probably Tori put it up. She shared it in chat. Yeah. So it is a private group. I have kicked the idea of doing like a page that's more public to have information on. But for right now, this is a private group, but you can request to join and I'll approve. And I think I am going to start from scratch because I have so many new members that didn't get that initial education that I provided. So to kind of start over and do that. Plus whenever you read something the second or third time, something new comes to mind. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you for that, Nancy, so much. And I'm leaving this up. Take screenshots of it. Nancy has given us permission. We didn't just
absolutely, yeah.
She actually gave this all to us. So I know lots of people are wondering like, oh, and the how and what do you use? And so Nancy very generously gave her email and of course the Facebook group, so you can talk to her if you want to take it a little deeper. And I mean, what we're talking about is community advocacy, community organizing, these really amazing grassroots kind of approaches that can be so very powerful. And some of the lessons, Nancy's been so generous sharing some of the lessons she's learned and the workarounds. So I definitely wanted to make sure we shared that. And then a couple of other, Nancy talked a lot about STAR, and STAR is a resource, and STAR is a resource for all of you. We have a ton, like Nancy said, so much on the website, sometimes too much. I know like right now the education team is watching this and going, make stop talking, but there's a lot of stuff on there. And then you can always reach out to us. That's what Nancy did and was like, what do you have? So I don't need to reinvent the wheel. What do you have that I can share? And we can do that. We can provide some slides, we can provide text, we can, articles, whatever it is people are looking for. We also have these additional courses. So I don't know, Nancy, I'm not sure if you've actually been able to come to any of the courses or watch anything, but
I have in the past. Yeah.
And so like, if you're trying to broaden your understanding because you want to transmit that understanding to others, sometimes these could be very, very useful. So we have one coming up. Actually, I am teaching that, Regulation 101, where we talk about regulation as this domain, as a foundation for function and wellness and its relationship to sensory processing. Nancy spoke a lot about her son's presentations of dysregulation, physical aggressiveness, not being polite. I'm like, my teenagers are regulated and they're just not polite. So I don't know. But I'll get around to it, I guess. So this is one option. If you are interested in learning more about regulation in general, we do talk about strategies, multiple strategies, and kind of this different way of conceptualizing regulation into 5 different regulation domains, and you can address each one of them, and they play together as well. So that's one thing. If you are this is actually open to anybody in the community. We have a course called Foundations of Development, and it really, Nancy has spoken a lot about how STAR kind of helped her understand how things worked together. And that's what Foundations does. It kind of breaks down sensory, it breaks down regulation, it breaks down relationship, and then explains like, so these are how these things come together in our world and why you might see these expressions from people and how we can support from a sensory regulation and relationship perspective, how we can support somebody, ourselves for that matter. And then I see there's a question, hold on. How much of this is taught in prisons? Oh, Rebecca, a person after my own heart. Not enough, which is, Rebecca, you're speaking to the social worker in me. So there has been research, not great research, not as much as there needs to be, but research that looks at trauma, like how incarcerated individuals, what's their trauma background, what's their developmental differences background, their neurodevelopmental differences background, including sensory. And there's some substantial research around this. You know, there's some stuff that is suggestive that, kind of like what Nancy said, there's like two problems happening. You've got the community that's not being supported, right? These individuals are not getting identified and supported adequately. And then the systems themselves that are not acknowledging and addressing those needs. And they just end up in prison. So definitely not an uncommon. Rebecca, very insightful.
I read 1 in 6 neuro in prison population are neurodivergent. I thought, well, I bet it's a little bit more.
I think the last one I read was 1 in 5. So
yeah,
yeah, I think it makes total sense.
mm-hmm.
Makes total sense. And how these, yeah, it's more for sure. Yeah, I think like we need more research and we need more sensitive research.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap all of this up, first, I just want to make sure I thank Nancy for her warmth, her generosity, her willingness to share her story, her vulnerability, all of you for coming, all of you who shared in chat or on camera. Thank you. Truly, authentically, and sincerely, thank you for providing us with that honor and opportunity to learn from you. These are not easy things to talk about. So thank you so much. And as I'm not sure if everyone knows, but STAR is in fact a nonprofit. We are a 501c3. And so if you found value in this discussion, and we truly hope you did, and value in the work that STAR does, treatment, education, research, any of the above, we ask that you help support that work. Everything counts. Every drop, the ocean is just a whole bunch of little drops, right? So everything counts. If you can give, we really appreciate it. And so our development officer has done a great job in how you can make those, you can right now scan that QR code, it'll take you straight to the donate button. You can mail a donation, Facebook fundraisers. On our website, there's a way to donate. You can do planned giving, make a tribute. We've had several families do that. It's really a lovely thing. So there is all of that information there as well. Again, it will also be on our website, which is, if one of the ed or development team could put in our website, which is www.sensoryhealth.org. And then I want, oh, thank you, STAR Institute, appreciate that. You are, Ruth, I can absolutely appreciate that, the overwhelm, but I know we all experience that. This is a very big thing. And I want to thank you all so much for being here and wanting to be part of this conversation and hearing about Nancy's journey with understanding sensory health and bringing it into her community and the huge impact she's having and how thrilled STAR is with her success. And we hope that for all of you, whether that's in your own life or if you take on sharing in your community in any way, we appreciate you for helping to promote our mission, which is better quality of life and better understanding of sensory health for all. So thank you all so much. You are really appreciated. So, whoops, let's get rid of that. And rock on, everyone. Thank you, Daniel. I don't think I've said that better myself. the question about CEUs for this, we are not providing CEUs for this talk, but you can absolutely see if your state board will take it, but we are not providing CEUs for it. So, all right. And everybody else, thank you so much. Be safe, be well, enjoy summer as much as you can. And Nancy, thanks again. You're just amazing.
Thank you for
And
having me. This was so fun. And thank you everybody for listening and caring and
thank
make
you.
a difference.
Thanks so much, everyone. We hope to see you back at even more of our talks and really appreciate you guys. Thanks, everyone. Be well.